it's Lori again, and welcome back to my kitchen. Today I would like to share my recipe and method for crispy dill pickles. Now you got the fresh cucumbers and you've got the dill, and we all want crispy pickles. And there's a ton of information out there on how to achieve crispy pickles. And I'm not saying that any of those other methods are the wrong way of doing them. I just would like to share with you how I get crispy pickles every time. And how I achieve that is through something called open kettle canning. Now, open kettle canning is a method of canning that can only be used with certain types of food items. And those food items would be very high in acid and or very high in sugar. So open kettle is acceptable to do with pickles that require vinegar, with jelly, with lots of sugar in it, jam, lots of sugar in it, and some people even use open kettle canning for their tomatoes. They cook the tomatoes and bring them to a boil and then open kettle can them. Now what open kettle canning requires is it's very important to have a sanitized jar, okay? And you can sanitize your jars however you want to do it. You can boil them in a pot of water for 10 minutes, or like me, place them into a cold oven and bring your oven temperature up to 220 degrees and let them sit in there for 10 minutes. That's how I choose how to sanitize my jars. But it's really, really important, since you're not going to be processing these in a hot water bath or a steam canner. It's very, very important to have a sanitized jar, okay? As clean as it can be and sanitized. So we have sanitized jars, and then we have hot lids, hot rings, and a hot food item, okay? So that's all that's required for open kettle. Now, like I said, after we get our pickles packed into our jars, we are not going to hot water bath them or steam can them. If you think about the logic of sticking cucumbers into a boiling environment for even 10 minutes, what's going to happen to them? They're going to cook and they're going to get soft. So I swear by this method. I've been doing this for ages and have never had a failure. This is an anaerobic environment. Vinegar makes an anaerobic environment that makes it so that it's virtually impossible for bacteria to grow inside this environment. So this is why it's safe, because you're using vinegar in this method. And the same thing goes for jams and jellies. Sugar is a preservative. You know, we might not think about it that way, but actually sugar is a preservative. Plus, whatever fruit you're making into your jam or your jelly, that has acid in it. Fruit is actually pretty high in acid, you know, depending on what you're using. But, so between the acid and the sugar, this is a very safe method to use. But it's super important, I just want to stress one more time, a sanitized jar. And everything needs to be hot, okay? Now, as you see me go through this process, I'm going to take my jars out of the oven. And I will tell you that as you're working with your jars, they will cool down. That's not a problem. As long as you sanitized it before you begin, that's fine. But what's going to really be important is that you have hot lids and rings and boiling hot brine. So let's get started, okay? I'm going to page down here onto my stove, and I will start telling you what you need, okay? First of all, you're going to need garlic cloves. You're going to need either fresh dill heads, or you can use dill seed. You're going to need bay leaves, and then you're going to need your brine, okay? So right now what I want to do is I want to concentrate on the brine. Now remember, before I start this whole process, I have put my jars into the oven and I've turned it on to 220 degrees. Excuse me. So my jars are being sanitized in the oven while I'm doing these other things. I have my lids and my rings prepared in my pan. Now I've kind of estimated how many cucumbers I have available today. I think I might get 3 or 4 quarts of pickles. And so I have 4 prepared jars and lids. All right, so to make the brine, Now this is a single recipe which will make 1 quart jar. 1 quart jar's brine is 1 cup vinegar, 1 cup water, 1 teaspoon salt, and 1 tablespoon sugar, okay? That's a single recipe. So now, remember that I'm doing 4 jars today, so I need to quadruple my recipe. So I am going to, for 4 quart jars, I am going to do 4 cups of white vinegar, and that goes in the pan. 4 cups of water. So this is just a 50-50 ratio of vinegar and water, all right? That goes in the pan. Now, to each single recipe, we had a tablespoon of sugar. Since I'm quadrupling it, I have 4 recipes. I want 4 tablespoons of sugar. And for each single recipe, it was 1 teaspoon of salt, so I want 4 teaspoons for my quadruple recipe. Now, canning salt, kosher salt, you're going to use a full teaspoon of salt per recipe. I'm using my fine ground pink Himalayan, and so I'm cutting that in half instead of a teaspoon just because of the type of salt that I am personally using. I'm only using a half a teaspoon. But if you use canning salt or kosher salt, you would want to use a full teaspoon. With the fine pink ground pink Himalayan, I'm having that because there's a lot more granulars that can fit into your measuring spoon. So I have 4 of those in there. All right, that is literally it for the brine, guys. So I'm going to page up here again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stir this up and I'm going to bring this to a boil. And while that's coming to a boil, I'm also going to heat those lids. Remember, I have my lids and my rings in a pan of water. So I'm going to heat these both up. You don't want to boil your lids, but get them good and hot, okay? But the brine you want to bring to a boil. And then we'll be back and I'll show you how to pack your jars with all sorts of goodies. Be back in a minute. All right, guys, so I got my jar out of the oven. I've already packed one, and I've got a second one out of the oven. Now, to each quart jar, I want you to add either 1 or 2 fresh heads of dill. Now, it just depends on how dilly you like your pickles to be, but I really like them very dilly, and so I put 2 fresh heads of dill into each quart jar. Now, if you don't have fresh dill, you can go ahead and you can use dill seed. And I would suggest 1 to 2 teaspoons at least per quart jar. Now, after you get your dill in there, I want you to stick in a clove of fresh garlic. If you don't have fresh garlic, I suggest at least 1 teaspoon of minced garlic. So that goes in there. And then a whole bay leaf. 1 bay leaf. So we have 1 or 2 heads of dill. We have 1 clove of garlic and 1 bay leaf. And that's it. Then you start packing your cucumbers in there. And this is where it becomes kind of a game of, I guess, Jenga, for lack of a better explanation. You just take your cucumbers and you want to get them packed in there as tightly as you can. Now, this is where I said also that, your jar is going to cool down as you're working with it, because there's nobody that can quickly pack a jar full of cucumbers and keep that jar hot from the oven. It's the nature of the beast. It's going to cool down. There's just nothing you can do about it. So you just sit there and you try to fit in your cucumbers just as tightly as you can and get as many of them in there as you can. Now, if you have larger cucumbers and you want to cut them into dill spears or even into coin-shaped pickles, that's absolutely fine. This works for that also. So you just do you and whatever works for you. But you get that jar as packed as tightly as you can, okay? And I want you to go to about 1 inch headspace, all right? So I'm going to grab another jar out of the oven here. And all the while, my brine is heating up and my lids are heating up, okay, while I'm doing this. So we have 2 heads of dill. I kind of squish them down with my fingers, as you can see, just kind of bunch them together. They're kind of like a flower. You just, oops, I see a dandelion fluff on there. Well, let's get that off of there. All right, so you just take them and you just kind of bunch them down with your hand and make them look like a little tree. Stick that in there. Then you got that nice fresh garlic. Stick that in there and 1 whole bay leaf. And then pack that full of cucumbers. Now it does work a little bit better with wide mouth jars because you can get your hand in there and work with stuff a little bit better. You know, some of you men that have larger hands, I guess I don't know that it will work better for you. But us ladies, we have a little bit smaller hands and we can get our hands down in there and kind of jiggle things around. Now I've got a cucumber in there that's misbehaving, not doing what I want it to, so I'm going to move him around. There we go. Now I'm going to, oh, I got enough room for another one to fit down in there. All right, it looks like I have just enough cucumbers for about 3 quarts of pickles. I wish I would have had just a couple more cucumbers, but that's how it is. I might take one from this jar. Yeah. All right. Okay. So I ended up with 3 quarts of pickles here. So we have our dill, we have our bay leaf, we have our garlic, and we have our cucumbers packed tightly. Now we have our brine that is coming to a boil. Let's see. Get him up on high. Stir it occasionally. You know, you do have that sugar and that salt in there. Let's get that up just a little bit more for you. And I also have my lids and rings heating, okay? And they look plenty hot to me, so I'm shutting that off. And I've got my brine up here just about ready to boil. All right, guys, I didn't think that you wanted to sit there for 10 minutes waiting for my brine to start boiling. So here we are back again. My brine has finally come to a boil. I've stirred it once in a while, you know, just to make sure that the sugar and the salt is dissolved. So we have our tightly packed jars. Now, the reason why you want it tightly packed is because the tighter packed that you can make this jar, the less brine you actually need to fill the jar. So if you have a really loose packed jar, you're going to go through 3 times as much brine as what you really need to. So pack those jars super tight, guys. So at this point in time, of course, our jars have cooled down like I told you they would when you're working with it. This is not uncommon to have that happen. So don't panic if your jar cools down a bit. I'm going to turn this off so that I don't start anything on fire. And all you're going to do now is you're going to carefully ladle in your boiling hot brine over all of the ingredients in your jar. You don't want to rush that in there too fast because you could have thermal shock happen. So just kind of drizzle it in there at first just to kind of get that jar acclimated, and then go ahead and fill it a little bit quicker. But that first scoop you always want to be a little bit careful with, just so that your jar gets acclimated and heated up. All right, we are going to bring this up to about a 1/2 inch headspace. There we are. And then we're going to quickly wipe our lid or our rim, and then we are going to get our hot lid and ring and pop that right on top of that hot jar. And believe me, it's hot again because that brine was boiling hot. And we're just going to crank that lid down a little bit more than finger tight. Not super, super tight, but not loose. You want to put it on there pretty firm because this is all you're doing now. You're not going to heat process this at all. This jar is done and it will seal as it cools. So here we are. We've got another jar ready to go. And we're going to fill it with the boiling hot brine. Be a little careful on that first ladleful. You don't want to shock that jar if it's cooled off. If your jar still happens to be hot, go ahead and just pour the brine right in. But if it has cooled off, be very careful with that first ladleful. And then after you get that first ladleful kind of in there carefully, then you can fill it quicker. And the quicker you can work, the better, because you really want everything hot when you get that lid placed. Make sure all those cucumbers are covered with brine. You don't want anything sticking out above the surface of the brine. Wipe the rim and get yourself a hot flat end ring. Tighten it and move on to your next jar. I'm going to get this out of the way. Get that a little closer. No, that pan is still really hot. I need that. Being kind of careful with the first ladleful so we don't cause thermal shock. And then finish filling her up. Take that out so that I can see what I'm doing. Wipe the rim. Get your hot lid and ring right on there and screw it on. Done. Done deal, guys. These will seal as they cool. This is open kettle. There is no further process. You're not going to water bath them. You're not going to steam can them. They are just a done deal. Now, I want to show you, everybody can say that they have the best crispy pickles, but proof is in the pudding. These are dill pickles that I did last year. Actually, it ended up being in August, just like we're in right now. You can see that I have my dill in there, and my garlic is in there, and somewhere in here is the bay leaf also. Oh, I guess it's down here on the bottom. But these are last year's cucumbers and last year's pickles done via open kettle canning, like what I have just done right now. And I am going to pop this bad boy open. If I can find a ledge here. And I want you all, here I'll pick it up so that you can see that I'm actually getting this right out of the jar. And yeah, me and my video making, right? Listen. You guys, crispy and delicious pickles every time. I'm telling you. Absolutely beautiful. No pickle crisp, no alum, no tricks. Just open kettle canning. So yummy. So yummy. Now, if you want to turn the heat up on these a little bit, feel free when you're packing your jar. Make sure that I'm on frame here. Feel free when you're packing your jar with your dill and your garlic and your pickles, or your cucumbers. They're not pickles yet, but you're making them into pickles. So when you're packing your jar, if you prefer to have a little spicy pickle, feel free to put a few little red pepper flakes in there or shove a jalapeno pepper in there. Just play with it and do what is according to your taste and your preference. But this is super simple. It's super safe. Because we are working with vinegar, there is no need to further heat process other than what we have done with the boiling hot brine, the sanitized jar, the hot lid, the hot ring. These are absolutely safe for years to come. So that is open kettle canning dill pickles. I hope you found some use in this video today. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for spending your time with me again, and happy canning, everybody.